best fucking chapter of the series so far. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage and welcome back to another Made in Abyss chapter review. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 32, End of a Fierce Fight. And when I say this is the best chapter of the entire series, I am not exaggerating, I am not overstating anything. This is single-handedly just the best chapter that I've read for this series in its entire run so far, and I'm sure that this excitement will only continue as we get further. Like, we're in the high point of the arc right now. This chapter was just 29 pages of non-stop greatness. Every single page, every single panel, everything was just so damn good. And honestly, I feel like I didn't do it the justice it deserved in the live reaction. If you watch that first, you'll see that I was kind of quieter and more subdued than I normally am. It's because I had to record that due to time constraints. I had to record that later in the night, and I was more tired than I usually am when I record those reactions. So I feel like I didn't just do the hype of that chapter the justice it deserved, but you better believe we're hyping that shit up now because god damn this chapter. Bondrewd! Let's just get right into it. I mean, the highlight of the chapter, there's so many highlights, so it's hard to pick just one. So let's just start with the fight against Bondrewd, the extensive fight between Reg and Bondrewd and the others teaming up. Nanachi just planning this whole thing, Rico doing her best to attack him while Reg has him distracted. It was just so damn good. I don't know if I can really go into detail about each panel and each situation that they found themselves in during this fight, but it was just, I can tell you that it was amazing and so well done. And what I love most about it isn't just that they fought, because obviously that's really hype, but I love how dynamic the battle was. This is probably the most intense exchange that we've gotten in the series so far as well. Maybe the Orb Piercer, but the Orb Piercer fight didn't last nearly as long as this battle. And then the Ozen fight, I would say, just didn't last nearly long enough, and the stakes weren't there when you realize that Ozen wasn't trying to kill them. Obviously, Bondrewd really isn't trying to kill them either, at least at this point in time, but the stakes are still felt because these people are legitimately trying to kill him to make sure that he never comes back. But when I say dynamic, I mean in manga form, it felt like I was watching an episode of the anime. Reg was punching and kicking, one arm missing, such a badass. Rico was firing this gun filled with the larvae of the Kuwangatari that they saw on layer 4. Shout out to Nanachi for that badass plan. It definitely worked. And then, to cap it all off, we end it going underwater in this underwater struggle against Bondrewd and Reg. And what's most interesting about this struggle to me is that I had no idea that this water, this sea of corpses, actually counted for the 6th layer. In fact, I wonder why they call it the Sea of Corpses if it's part of the 6th layer and not the 5th layer. Because Nanachi said that if Reg descended with Bondrewd down into the water and ascended back up, Bondrewd would definitely feel the effects of the 6th layer, and he did. So it's just kind of weird that the effects of the 6th layer take place just so close to the 5th layer. The fight ends in spectacular fashion as Reg ascends back up with Bondrewd, transforming him into his own adult-formed MIDI, and as far as we know, the deed is done. Obviously, he has a little bit of his humanity left, because I assume since they're in the transitional period between the 5th and 6th layer, it's not like Bondrewd turned completely into a MIDI, but he definitely has that, like, form. He is looking very MIDI right now, but he's still able to talk. At least he was able to, until Reg just smashes his entire body with a giant rock. And at this point in time, I was not fazed in the slightest. I knew Bondrewd was coming back somehow. You don't hype up this entire arc and let Bondrewd die in the first, like, 3 chapters. But I was curious as to how he would survive and how he would get out of this situation where he has basically been killed. And this is where we learn a lot of information. This chapter wasn't just action-packed, it had a ton of information and things to discuss. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the praying hands. Now, when I talked about the praying hands in my chapter reviews, a lot of people were cheekily saying, annoyingly so at times, that there's more to the praying hands than just their Bondrewd's underlings. And now we finally know the full extent of the praying hands. In Bondrewd's own words, every single praying hand is just himself. Now, what this means and how he did this, I have no idea, and I'm sure we'll find that out in the future. But they are himself to the point where he can just rip off his mushified head, put it on one of his praying hands, and he's just Bondrewd again somehow. I don't know how it works. This was a major plot twist, and I was very noticeably surprised in the live reaction, but the reveal is so damn good, and I love how Pushka just immediately accepts it. She sees her dead father, and then when he puts his head back on, she's like, oh my god, you're alive! And it's just so funny. But I'm just seriously wondering how he was able to accomplish this in the first place. It's also after this point that we get the amazing introduction of Bondrewd, because he never formally introduced himself to the group, and now we get that formal introduction, and it is just incredible. I love Bondrewd so much. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself yet, and Reg is just steaming. He's so fucking infuriated right now. Oh god, I love Bondrewd at this point. I mean, I already loved him, but this chapter just cemented him as just this wonderful villain. Speaking of Reg, there was some incredible moments with Reg in this chapter. I would say some of my favorite moments of the series with Reg. His development has just reached a new high point in this chapter. Some of it didn't have the payoff that I wanted, but I can see us getting that payoff in the future. And to elaborate more on that, there's a point where Pushka is looking at Bondrewd, dead Bondrewd, on the ground after Reg had smashed him with a rock, and this is a surprise because they did not expect Pushka to be out here, especially after she was captured by the praying hands. But Pushka sees her dead father on the ground and just starts crying, and she doesn't really lay any blame on anybody, but she kind of does. She says, oh, how cruel, how could you do this? And Reg's response is just incredible. You just see him fucking mad. There's just these thought bubbles. He's not saying it out loud, but he's just saying, so what? So what? And he legit looks like he's about to snap at Pushka for being like sad over her dead father, and I just love that we've reached this point with Reg. Reg is not an infallible character. Like, I understand his feelings right now, but it is kind of fucked up to be thinking that at the sight of his daughter mourning his death. But it makes complete sense why he's doing it. Bondrewd has done so many fucked up things to everybody. It makes sense. So what? So what that this man has died when he has caused the death of so many other loved individuals that did nothing wrong? But you can also see it from Pushka's point of view, because she's his daughter. Like, she obviously cares about him very much. There's another point right after Reg has smashed Bondrewd with a rock where he just starts bursting into tears. The emotional weight of sealing this fate for a character who has caused so much harm on a friend of his and somebody who he has heard so much about and had to personally kill, the emotion is just overwhelming to him, and it makes complete sense that he would just break down in this moment, finally delivering justice, or at least so he thought. And when you see Bondrewd come back and Reg just sees it happening before his eyes, and he says irredeemable, I was like, really? That's all you have to say? But then the next two panels are some of my favorite Reg panels in the entire series. I feel like that's going to be a running trend of this review, just hearing that, because there was so much greatness in this chapter. Reg just screams. He says, don't mess around. What the hell are you? After all the effort he put into killing him. It is just absolutely fantastic. Reg is only second in this chapter to Bondrewd himself, but that's nothing to shake a stick at. Reg was amazing in this chapter. During the beginning section, when Bondrewd and his praying hands are being attacked by the stingerheads that we trapped him in last chapter, we get another Habbo section, much like the one where he described Ozen's character before the full fight with Ozen began back in episode 7 of the anime. We get one for Bondrewd as well, and Habbo gives some very interesting information that we didn't know prior to this chapter about Bondrewd's origins almost, and what he did to start cave raiding in the first place. He makes some very interesting notes about Bondrewd's character as well, about how he doesn't even seem human himself, but more like a creature that's imitating humans, and I love that description. I obviously don't think that he means that literally, but more so metaphorically, about how Bondrewd has never really been in touch with his humanity, and that makes complete sense. That almost actually ties back into what Nanachi was saying last chapter about how Bondrewd always looks at the whole picture and is so focused on one thing that he never realizes the finer details and notices people's emotions. A lot of you guys said that to me last chapter when I was confused about what Nanachi was saying before Bondrewd got trapped. That's what she meant, and that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it's cool that we have Bondrewd not be a perfect character, just this all-knowing character that doesn't have any flaws. He's a bigger picture kind of guy, which obviously led to his trapping last chapter, although in the end that didn't even matter. But more importantly than Habo's explanation on his humanity, we actually learn that Bondrewd had been selling relics and information about the Abyss illegally, and also received huge foreign funding through the medicine that he produced through human experimentation. Whether that's the human experimentation they did in the Abyss, or whether or not he did that on the surface as well, who knows. But Habo also goes on to say that he apparently is wanted in foreign countries, but everyone who was sent after him just disappeared, and that makes complete sense knowing Bondrewd. Honestly, Bondrewd probably captured them and used them for his experiments versus just killing them. But obviously, the biggest what the fuck WTF moment of the chapter is at the end. Not that he put his head on the praying hand, that was a pretty WTF moment too, but it is his lines after his introduction. "You truly are wonderful. You brought about a level of tribulation that we could not reach and paved the way for Pushka's completion." What does this mean? What is going on? Because later on in the chapter, at the very end, we see Bondrewd almost prepping Pushka for surgery. So clearly, Pushka's reaction to her father's death sparked something that Bondrewd needed to enter the final stages of Pushka's experimentation. And goddamn, don't touch her! I knew this was bound to happen, but I did not want this to happen at all. I just wonder what his endgame goal is with this. How does this benefit Bondrewd? How does this benefit him getting rid of the curse? Who knows, but obviously we'll be finding out. I'm just so curious as to how this relates to anything going on. At the end, we see Bondrewd say, "Please dispose of anything marked in crimson," and then starts drawing on her body, and it's literally every part of her body. So what, are you cutting her apart? What is going on here? Pushka holds the secrets to something that Bondrewd needs, or is going to help him reach a scientific breakthrough. I have no idea, but the dialogue between him and Pushka in these final pages are heartbreaking. Pushka just, I don't know if she knows what's going on, although I have a feeling that she does. I think she does know what's going on, but she's willingly giving herself up for Bondrewd's aspirations. I love the way that they tie in Bondrewd's name, saying, "Let us witness the dawn together." That's so badass. I just wish it wasn't in such a heartbreaking scene with one of my favorite characters. But now we start getting into the finer details, and one complaint I had at the beginning of the chapter that was very alleviated by the end is that I thought the battle between Reg and Bondrewd, even with Rico and Nanachi's help, just went by way too easily. Bondrewd went down so easily, and it felt almost cheating in a way. Like, this is a white whistle here. No matter how much they've grown over this journey, they should not be taking him down this easily. And of course, by the end, we see that he's revived, and not only is he revived, it feels like he's actually taking shit seriously, and he just wipes them out. He is toying with them. I love this part so much. Bondrewd just kicking the shit out of Reg with his tail, firing these shakers, I guess they're called, into Rico and just making her vomit. Like, Rico holds up her gun like she's gonna do shit, and then Bondrewd's like, "Sit down, bitch." It's just so funny. Nanachi is just devastated. You see her weeping at the end. I'll talk about that in a bit. But what I found the most interesting about this, other than the fact that Bondrewd is a fucking badass, is that these shakers, the needles that he shoots into Rico, actually have the curse of the third layer embedded inside them, I guess. And at first I was like, how did Bondrewd manage this? How did he create something that actually had the curse of the abyss inside of it? But in the final bonus page of the chapter, we learn that these shakers are called curse needles, and they're actually processed artifacts cut from the cursed steel artifact. So I guess Bondrewd has found multiple cursed steel artifacts, holds them in Edofront, and creates them by carving them out of the steel itself. So that's really interesting, and I wonder if we'll get more artifacts or relics in the future that have the curse of the abyss embedded within them. Imagine a artifact that has the 4th layer's curse in it. Oh my god. Last chapter I made a note that the praying hands referred to Nanachi as the blessed, and I wondered what that meant because I saw that word floating around the comments for a while ever since the finale, and I wondered what was the full explanation for that. And in this chapter we didn't really get the full explanation for what this blessed thing means, but we do get a lot more insight on what it is and why Nanachi is the blessed. And from what I gather, essentially, when Nanachi and Midi were in the experiment, the elevator going down into the 6th layer, when it ascended back up, the love between Nanachi and Midi was so strong that Midi took the brute force of every single bit of the curse of the abyss, and so Nanachi, on the other side, only received the blessing of the abyss. And I think this was part of Bondrewd's experiment. One side was supposed to get the blessing, and the other the curse. But what I wonder is, what does this blessing entail for Nanachi? Because Nanachi still ended up becoming a hollow. She just didn't end up losing her consciousness. So I wonder what this blessing actually means in terms of the abyss and it versus the curse of the abyss. We also learned that Bondrewd has not been able to replicate this at all. In fact, Nanachi is the sole successful instance of this happening. So that explains why Bondrewd is so keen on keeping her there, although obviously not keen enough to actually bring her with him. I'll talk about that later too, I just thought that was hilarious. But yeah, I just wonder what the blessing does, or if the only purpose of the blessing is, oh, you survived this time going up, ascending the abyss. But in that case, I feel like Nanachi should at least be immune to the curse at this point. But she's not. In this chapter alone, we find out that she's not immune to the curse of the abyss. She's only tolerant to the 5th layer's curse because she's been down here for so long with Bondrewd. Speaking of being down there with Bondrewd, we also learned some very weird but cool information that explains a lot about what's been going on during this arc. Last chapter I wondered how Bondrewd and his praying hands found Nanachi so quickly when they had just deserted into the 5th layer, and eventually I just dismissed it as, oh, he's a white whistle, he's Bondrewd, he can do anything, he can find them very easily. But in fact, in this chapter we learn that somehow, I don't know how, but somehow they can hijack Nanachi's vision and see what she sees. The only additional information that we get about this is Nanachi saying it might be related to what the praying hands did. They hijack my vision. Now, what this means, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how they're able to do this, but my guess is that this has something to do with something that they did previously when Nanachi was working with Bondrewd. They might have implanted something into her, or they performed some experiments on her before they let her keep working. I don't know. I mean, Bondrewd has a flesh signal that determines whether or not somebody is alive, so at this point I wouldn't be shocked if Nanachi had something in her that is what allowed Bondrewd to look through her eyes. A few additional comments that I want to make about the chapter before we close this review of this amazing chapter. I want to talk about the more technical aspects, and I want to talk specifically about the stylization on Bondrewd this chapter. Previously to this chapter, the only stylization that we've had on Bondrewd is making his line work a lot more dark and a lot more scratchy looking, almost like it's done with marker. And that continues in this chapter, but in this chapter we get a lot more dynamic stylization to the likes of what Akihito did with Ozen in the Ozen confrontation, not just in the fight itself, but when they were talking and she has this menacing smile or whatever. He likes to do this with his main character villains, and he does this to a certain extent with Bondrewd himself. One of my favorite panels in the chapter is just this very close-up shot of Bondrewd's helmet, and you just see all the pastel markings, and you can see the helmet twisting and turning. It's so well done. The other bit of stylization that I really enjoyed was, I think it was the page prior to this, when Bondrewd is actually attacking everybody at full strength and just wiping them out. In contrast to Bondrewd's full figured form that was fighting Reg previously that ended up losing, in this full power form, we get a much different looking Bondrewd for some of these panels, taking the shape of almost this dark orb or this ball with a tail sticking out. It's very strange, and some might even say that it's a little bit lazy compared to Akihito's art in the rest of this chapter, but to me, I just see a lot of stylization and a lot of creativity in the way that they're choosing to represent Bondrewd's form at this point in time. Obviously he has the giant cloak on, but I just love when they close up on giant orb Bondrewd and it just looks surprisingly menacing, which you would not expect. You would expect that to look just really stupid, but he makes it work to the point where it's very terrifying seeing this up close. Obviously he doesn't do that for every single shot with full powered Bondrewd, so I don't think it's like some symbolic thing, but I really enjoyed that creative choice for some of those panels. And of course, I have to make a note on Bondrewd as a whole this chapter. I've said it so many times, I don't think I need to talk about it so much, but Bondrewd was just absolutely incredible this chapter, and even if he didn't do shit for the rest of this arc, I can understand why he would be such a fan favorite character and why he would be so loved by the community just from how he was in this chapter, although I assume it just gets better and better from here going forward, which further cements his place as one of the best characters in this series. I just love this line after he's wiped out the entire group. He doesn't even take them with him. He says, "I apologize, but I must take my leave. Feel free to come anytime. I shall welcome you." He just leaves them. That's how badass he is. Nanachi just left in the snow, or as somebody corrected me, it's actually frosted sand, which would actually make a lot more sense with these scorpions or stinger heads lying underneath the sand in this context. But yeah, Nanachi is just left there. She's devastated. She's full on weeping because she doesn't want to go back to Bondrewd, but luckily for her, she just is left there. But you can just see how hopeless she is because this is exactly what she didn't want to happen. Luckily, he didn't full on kill anybody, but you know that he will in the future. Right now, he's just so preoccupied with Pushka that he doesn't even have time to deal with them right now. One final note that I thought was interesting, not related to the chapter itself, but the bonus page of the chapter where I mentioned the curse needle and the explanation for that, we actually see a full category, not really full, but a somewhat complete category of most of the monsters that we've seen on our journey so far. And prior to this page, I thought that the 5 stars was the most dangerous creature that you could get in the Abyss, which is why it was always so surprising seeing one there. Like at that Orb Piercer, he can see the future. His spines not only cut through steel, but they poison you to the point where you're not going to survive. That's about as dangerous as it gets. But no, on this bonus page, we see that there are categories for 6 stars and 7-star creatures. So I am so excited to see examples of this in the future. Let's hope that we don't have any more Orb Piercer style encounters in the future where we just end up that fucked. But I really do want to see these types of creatures in the future. I imagine we won't really be seeing them this arc, but maybe on the 6th layer, whenever we get there, we'll be seeing a lot more of those 6-star and 7-star creatures. And why stop there? I feel like if they're opening it up that much, we might get 8-star and 9-star creatures as well the further we go down. You know there's going to be some really dangerous creatures on the 7th layer and at the bottom most likely as well. But that's been all for me for this chapter review of Made in Abyss. Thank you guys so much for the support, the comments, the likes, just everything. I really appreciate it a lot. I enjoy talking to you guys every single chapter, every single episode review that I do. It's so much fun. Even though it takes up the majority of my night, it's worth it. I really enjoy talking to you guys. And speaking of that, I'm sorry that this review is going up somewhat later than I wanted it to. If you couldn't tell throughout the review, I was actually trying to improv a bit more than I usually do. Usually, I'm more meticulous with what I want to say, and I'll do multiple takes and all that, but this is kind of freeform. I didn't really do a lot of pauses and takes for things this time, so if I messed up throughout, I'm sorry. But I needed to do this review faster than I usually do, so hope it worked out. Hope you guys still had fun watching this review and the reaction, even though it wasn't as spirited as this review. I hope that was still fun to watch as well. And of course, as always, have a great day.